Here begins the never to be too much studied account of the 999th part of the wonderful things which Tom saw on his journey to the other end of nowhere, which all good little children are requested to read, that if ever they get to the other end of nowhere, as they may very probably do, they may not burst out laughing or try to run away or do any other silly vulgar thing which may offend Mrs. B. Dunby as you did. Now, as soon as Tom had left Peacepool, he came to the white lap of the great sea mother, 10,000 fathoms deep, where she makes world pap all day long for the steam giants to knead and the fire giants to bake, till it has risen and hardened into mountain loaves and island cakes. And there Tom was very near being kneaded up in the world pap and turned into a fossil water baby, which would have astonished the Geological Society of New Zealand some hundreds of thousands of years hence. For as he walked along in the silence of the sea twilight on the soft white ocean floor, he was aware of a hissing and a roaring and a thumping and a pumping as of all the steam engines in the world at once. And when he came near, the water grew boiling hot. Not that that hurt him in the least, but it also grew as foul as gruel. And every moment he stumbled over dead shells and fish and sharks and seals and whales which had been killed by the hot water. And at last he came to the great sea serpent himself, lying dead at the bottom, and as he was too thick to scramble over, Tom had to walk round him 3/4 of a mile and more, which put him out of his path sadly. And when he had got round, he came to the place called Stop, and there he stopped just in time, for he was on the edge of a vast hole in the bottom of the sea, up which was rushing and roaring clear steam enough to work all the engines in the world at once. So clear indeed that it was quite light at moments, and Tom could see almost up to the top of the water above, and down below into the pit, for nobody knows how far. But as soon as he bent his head over the edge, he got such a rap on the nose from pebbles that he jumped back again, for the steam, as it rushed up, rasped away at the sides of the hole and hurled it up into the sea in a shower of mud and gravel and ashes. Then it spread all around and sank again, and covered in the dead fish so fast that before Tom had stood there 5 minutes, he was buried in silt up to his ankles, and began to be afraid that he should have been buried alive. And perhaps he would have been, but that while he was thinking, the whole piece of ground on which he stood was torn off and blown upwards, and away flew Tom a mile up through the sea, wondering what was coming next. At last he stopped, thump, and found himself tight in the legs of the most wonderful bogey which he had ever seen. It had, I don't know how many wings, as big as the sails of a windmill, and spread out in a ring like them, and with them it hovered over the steam which rushed up as a ball hovers over the top of a fountain, and for every wing above it had a leg below, with a claw like a comb at the tip, and a nostril at the root, and in the middle it had no stomach and one eye, and as for its mouth, that was all on one side, as the madreporiform tubercle of a starfish is. Well, it was a very strange beast, but no stranger than some of the dozens which you may see. "What do you want here?" it cried, quite peevishly. "Getting in my way!" And it tried to drop Tom, but he held on tight to its claws, thinking himself safer where he was. So Tom told him who he was and what his errand was, and the thing winked its one eye and sneered, "I'm too old to be taken in that way. You're come after gold. I know you are." Gold? What is gold? And really Tom did not know, but the suspicious old bogey would not believe him. But after a while Tom began to understand a little, for as the vapours came up out of the hole, the bogey smelt them with his nostrils and combed them and sorted them with his combs, and then when they steamed up through them against his wings, they were changed into showers and streams of metal. From one wing fell gold dust, from another silver, and from another copper, and from another tin, and from another lead, and so on, sank into the soft mud, into veins and cracks, and hardened there, whereby it comes to pass that the rocks are full of metal. But all of a sudden somebody shut off the steam below, and the hole was left empty in an instant, and then down rushed the water into the hole in such a whirlpool that the bogey spun round and round and round as fast as a teetotum. But that was all in his day's work, like a fair fall with the hounds. So all he did was to say to Tom, "Now's your time, youngster, to get down if you're in earnest, which I don't believe." "You'll soon see," said Tom. And away he went, as bold as Baron Munchausen, and shot down the rushing cataract like a salmon at Balisadaire. And then when he got to the bottom, he swam till he was washed on shore, safe upon the other end of nowhere. And he found it, to his surprise, as most other people do, much more like this end of somewhere than he had been in the habit of expecting. And first he went through waste paper land, where all the stupid books lie in heaps, uphill, down dale, like leaves in a winter wood. And there he saw people digging and grubbing among them to make worse books out of bad ones, and thrashing chaff to save the dust of it. And a very good trade they drove there, especially among children. And then he went by the Sea of Slops, to the Mountain of Messes, and the territory of Tuck, where the ground was very sticky, for it was all made of bad toffee, not Everton toffee, of course, full of deep cracks and holes choked with wind-fallen fruit, and green gooseberries, and sloes, and crabs, and windberries, and hips and haws, and all the nasty things which little children will eat if they can get them. But the fairies hide them out of the way in that country as fast as they can. Very hard work they have, and of very little use it is. For as fast as they hide away the old trash, foolish and wicked people make fresh trash full of lime, poisonous paints, and actually go and steal receipts out of old Madam Science's big book to invent poisons for little children and sell them at wakes and fairs and tuck shops. Very well, let them go on. Dr. Leithby and Dr. Hassel cannot catch them, though they are setting traps for them all day long. But the fairy with the birch rod will catch them all in time, and make them begin at one corner of their shops and eat their way out at the other, by which time they will have got such stomach aches as will cure them of poisoning little children. Next he saw all the little people in the world, writing all the little books in the world, about all the other little people in the world, probably because they had no great people to write about. And if the names of the books were not Squeaky, nor the Pumplighter, nor the Narrow, Narrow World, nor the Hills of the Chattermuch, nor the Children's Twaddle Day, why then they were something else, and all the rest of the little people in the world read the books, and thought themselves each as good as the president. Perhaps they were right, for everyone knows his own business best. But Tom thought he would sooner have a jolly good fairy tale about Jack the Giant Killer, or Beauty and the Beast, which taught him something that he didn't know already. And next he came to the centre of creation, the hub they call it there, which lies in latitude 42·21 degrees south and longitude 108·56 degrees east. And there he found all the wise people instructing mankind in the science of spirit rapping, while their house was burning over their heads. And when Tom told them of the fire, they held an indignation meeting forthwith, and unanimously determined to hang Tom's dog for coming into their country with gunpowder in his mouth. Tom couldn't help saying that though they did fancy they'd carried all the wit away with them out of Lincolnshire 200 years ago, yet if they had one such Lincolnshire nobleman among them as good as old Lord Yarborough, he would have called for the fire engines before he hanged other people's dogs. But it was of no use, and the dog was hanged. And Tom couldn't even have his carcass, for they'd abolished the Have His Carcass Act in that country, for fear lest when rogues fell out, honest men should come by their own. And so they would have succeeded perfectly, as they always do, only that as they always do, they failed in one little particular, viz. That the dog would not die, being a water dog, and bit their fingers so abominably that they were forced to let him go, and Tom likewise, as British subjects. Whereon they recommenced rapping for the spirits of their fathers, and very much astonished the poor old spirits were when they came, and saw how, according to the laws of Mrs. Be-done-by-as-you-did, their descendants had weakened their constitution by hard living. Then came Tom to the island of Polupragmasine, which some call Rogues Harbour, but they're wrong, for that is in the middle of Bramshill bushes, and the county police have cleared it out long ago. There, everyone knows his neighbour's business better than his own, and a very noisy place it is, as might be expected, considering that all the inhabitants are, ex officio, on the wrong side of the house in the Parliament of Man and the Federation of the World, and are always making wry mouths and crying that the fairies' grapes were sour. There Tom saw ploughs drawing horses, nails driving hammers, birds' nests taking boys, books making authors, bulls keeping china shops, monkeys shaving cats, dead dogs drilling live lions, blind brigadiers shelved as principals of colleges, play actors not in the least shelved as popular preachers, and in short, every one set to do something which he had not learned, because in what he had learned, or pretended to learn, he had failed. There stands the pantheon of the great unsuccessful, from the builders of the Tower of Babel to those of the Trafalgar fountains, in which politicians lecture on the constitutions which ought to have marched, conspirators on the revolutions which ought to have succeeded, economists on the schemes which ought to have made everyone's fortune, and projectors on the discoveries which ought to have set the Thames on fire. There, cobblers lecture on orthopedy, whatever that may be, because they cannot sell their shoes, and poets on aesthetics, whatever that may be, because they cannot sell their poetry. There, philosophers demonstrate that England would be the freest and richest country in the world if she would only turn papist again. Penny-a-liners abuse the Times because they have not wit enough to get on its staff, and young ladies walk about with lockets of Charles I's hair, or somebody else's when the genuine stock is used up, inscribed with a neat and appropriate legend, which indeed is popular through all that land, which I hope you will learn to translate in due time, and to perpend likewise: Victrix causa diis placuit, sed victa puellis. When he got into the middle of the town, they all set on him at once to show him his way, or rather to show him that he did not know his way, for as for asking him what way he wanted to go, no one ever thought of that. But one pulled him hither, another poked him thither, and a third cried, "You mustn't go west, I tell you. It's destruction to go west." "But I'm not going west, as you may see," said Tom. And another, "The east lies here, my dear. I assure you this is the east." "But I don't want to go east," said Tom. "Well then, at all events, whichever way you are going wrong," cried they all with one voice, which was the only thing that they ever agreed about, and all pointed at once to all the 32 points of the compass, till Tom thought all the signposts in England had got together and fallen to fighting. And whether he would have ever escaped out of the town, it's hard to say if the dog had not taken it into his head that they were going to pull his master in pieces, and tackled them so sharply about the gastrocnemius muscle that he gave them some business of their own to think about at last. And while they were rubbing their bitten calves, Tom and the dog got safe away. On the borders of that island he found Gotham, where the wise men live, the same ones who dragged the pond because the moon had fallen into it, and planted a hedge around the cuckoo to keep spring all the year. And he found them bricking up the town gate because it was so wide that little folks could not get through. And when he asked why, they told him they were expanding their liturgy. So he went on, for it was no business of his. Only he could not help saying that in his country, if the kitten could not get in at the same hole as the cat, she might stay outside and mew. But he saw the end of such fellows when he came to the island of the Golden Asses, where nothing but thistles grow. For there they were all turned into mokes with ears a yard long, for meddling with matters which they do not understand. As Lucius did in the story, and like him, mokes they must remain, till, by the laws of development, the thistles develop into roses. Till then they must comfort themselves with the thought that the longer their ears are, the thicker their hides, so a good beating don't hurt them. Then came Tom to the great land of Hearsay, in which are no less than 30 and odd kings, beside half a dozen republics, and perhaps more by the next mail. And there he fell in with a deep, dark, deadly, and destructive war, waged by the princes and potentates of those parts, both spiritual and temporal, against what do you think? One thing I'm sure of, that unless I told you, you'd never know. Nor how they waged that war either. For all their strategy and art, military consisted in the safe and easy process of stopping their ears and screaming, "Oh, don't tell us!" and then running away. So when Tom came into that land, he found them all, high and low, man and woman and child, running for their lives, day and night, continually, and entreating not to be told they didn't know what. Only the land being an island, and they having a dislike to the water, being a musty lot for the most part, they ran round and round the shore for ever, which, as the island was exactly of the same circumference as the planet on which we have the honour of living, was hard work, especially to those who had business to look after. But before them, as bandmaster and fugleman, ran a gentleman shearing a pig, the melodious strains of which animal led them for ever, if not to conquest, still to flight, and kept up their spirits mightily with the thought that they would at least have the pig's wool for their pains. And running after them, day and night, came such a poor, lean, seedy, hard-worked old giant as ought to have been cockered up, and had a good dinner given him, and a good wife found him, and been set to play with little children. Then he would have been a very presentable old fellow after all, for he had a heart, though it was considerably overgrown with brains. He was made up principally of fish bones and parchment, put together with wire and Canada balsam. It smelt strongly of spirits, though he never drank anything but water, but spirits he used somehow, there was no denying. He had a great pair of spectacles on his nose, and a butterfly net in one hand, and a geological hammer in the other, and was hung all over with pockets full of collecting boxes, bottles, microscopes, telescopes, barometers, ordnance maps, scalpels, forceps, photographic apparatus, and all other tackle for finding out everything about everything, and a little more too. And most strange of all, he was running not forwards but backwards, as fast as he could. Away all the good folks ran from him, except Tom, who stood his ground and dodged between his legs, and the giant, when he had passed him, looked down and cried as if he was quite pleased and comforted, "What? Who are you? And you actually don't run away like all the rest?" But he had to take his spectacles off, Tom remarked, in order to see him plainly. Tom told him who he was, and the giant pulled out a bottle and a cork instantly to collect him with. But Tom was too sharp for that, dodged between his legs and in front of him, and then the giant could not see him at all. "No, no, no," said Tom. "I've not been round the world and through the world and up to Mother Carey's haven, beside being caught in a net and called a holothurian and a cephalopod, to be bottled up by any old giant like you." When the giant understood what a great traveller Tom had been, he made a truce with him at once, and would have kept him there to this day to pick his brains, so delighted was he at finding anyone to tell him what he did not know before. "Ah, you lucky little dog," said he at last, quite simply, for he was the simplest, pleasantest, honestest, kindest old Dominie Sampson of a giant that ever turned the world upside down without intending it. "Ah, you lucky little dog, if I had only been where you have been to see what you have seen." "Well," said Tom, If you want to do that, you'd best put your head under water for a few hours, as I did, and turn into a water baby or some other baby. Then you might have a chance. Turn into a baby, eh? If I could do that and know what was happening to me for but 1 hour, I should know everything then and be at rest. But I can't. I can't be a little child again. And I suppose if I could, it would be no use, because then I should then know nothing about what was happening to me. Oh, you lucky little dog, said the poor old giant. And why do you run after all these poor people, said Tom, who liked the giant very much. My dear, it's they that have been running after me, father and son, for hundreds and hundreds of years, throwing stones at me till they've knocked off my spectacles 50 times, calling me a malignant and turbaned Turk who beat a Venetian and traduced the state. Goodness only knows what they mean, for I never read poetry, and hunting me round and round, though catch me they can't, for every time I go over the same ground I go faster and grow bigger. Well, all I want is to be friends with them and to tell them something to their advantage, like Mr. Joseph A.D. Only somehow they're so strangely afraid of hearing it. But I suppose I'm not a man of the world and have no tact. Why don't you turn round and tell them so? Because I can't, you see. I'm one of the sons of Epimetheus and must go backwards if I'm to go at all. But why don't you stop and let them come up to you? Why, my dear, only think, if I did, all the butterflies and cocky-olly birds would fly past me, and then I would catch no more new species, and should grow rusty and mouldy and die. I don't intend to do that, my dear, for I have a destiny before me. They say, though what it is I don't know, and don't care. Don't care, said Tom. No! Do the duty which lies nearest you and catch the first beetle you come across is my motto, and I've thriven by it for some 100 years. Now, I must go on. Dear me, while I've been talking to you, at least 9 new species have escaped me. And on went the giant, behind, before, like a bull in a china shop, until he ran into the steeple of the great idol temple, for they're all idolaters in those parts, of course, else they'd never be afraid of giants, and knocked the upper half clean off, hurting himself horribly about the small of the back. But little he cared, for as soon as the ruins of the steeple were well between his legs, he poked and peered among the falling stones and shifted his spectacles and pulled out his pocket magnifier and cried, "Oh, an entirely new oniscus and 3 obscure podurellae, besides a moth which Monsieur le Roi des Papillons, though he, like all Frenchmen, is given to hasty inductions, says is confined to the limits of the glacial drift. This is most important." And down he sat on the nave of the temple, not being a man of the world, to examine his podurellae, whereon, as was to be expected, the roof caved in bodily, smashing the idols and sending the priests flying out of the doors and windows like rabbits out of a burrow when a ferret goes in. But he never heeded, for out of the dust flew a bat, and the giant had him in a moment. "Dear me, this is even more important. Here is a cognate species to that which Macgilly-Walkie Brown insists is confined to the Buddhist temples of Little Tibet. And now when I look at it, it may be only a variety produced by difference of climate." And having bagged his bat, up he got and on he went, while all the people ran, being in none the better humour for having their temples smashed for the sake of 3 obscure species of podurella and a Buddhist bat. Well, thought Tom, this is a very pretty quarrel, with a good deal to be said on both sides, but it is no business of mine. And no more it was, because he was a water baby, and had the original sow by the right ear, which you will never have, unless you be a baby. Whether of the water, the land, or the air matters not, provided you can only keep on continually being a baby. So the giant ran round after the people, and the people ran round after the giant, and they are running to this day for aught I know, or do not know, and will run till either he or they or both turn into little children. And then, as Shakespeare says, and therefore it must be true, Jack shall have his Jill, naught shall go ill, The man shall have his mare again, and all go well. Then Tom came to a very famous island, which was called, in the days of the great traveller Captain Gulliver, the Isle of Laputa. But Mrs. Bedunbuy-As-You-Did has named it over again the Isle of Tom Toddies, all heads and no bodies. And when Tom came near it, he heard such a grumbling and grunting and growling and wailing and weeping and whining that he thought people must be wringing little pigs or cropping puppies' ears or drowning kittens. But when he came nearer still, he began to hear words among the noise, which was the Tom Toddies' song, which they sing morning and evening, and all night too, to their great idol, Examination. I can't learn my lesson, the examiner's coming. And that was the only song they knew. And when Tom got on shore, the first thing he saw was a great pillar, on one side of which was inscribed, "Playthings not allowed here," at which he was so shocked that he would not stay to see what was written on the other side. Then he looked round for the people of the island, but instead of men, women and children, he found nothing but turnips and radishes, beet and mangel wurzel, without a single green leaf among them, and half of them burst and decayed, with toadstools growing out of them. Those which were left began crying to Tom in half a dozen different languages at once, and all of them badly spoken. I can't learn my lesson, do come and help me. And one cried, can you show me how to extract this square root? And another, can you tell me the distance between plus or minus Lyrae and Camelopardis? And another, what is the latitude and longitude of Snooksville in No Man's County, Oregon, US? And another, what was the name of Mucius Scævola's 13th cousin's grandmother's maid's cat? And another, how long would it take a school inspector of average activity to tumble head over heels from London to York? And another, can you tell me the name of a place that nobody ever heard of, where nothing ever happened, in a country which has not been discovered yet? And another, can you show me how to correct this hopelessly corrupt passage of Gradiocollosaurus taberneticus on the cause why crocodiles have no tongues? And so on, and so on, and so on, until one would have thought they were all trying for Tidewaiter's place or Connetz's in the Heavy Dragoons. And what good on earth will it do you if I did tell you, quoth Tom. Well, they didn't know that. All they knew was the examiner was coming. Then Tom stumbled on the hugest and softest nimble-come-quick turnip that you ever saw filling a hole in a crop of Swedes. And it cried to him, can you tell me anything at all about anything you like? About what? Says Tom. About anything you like. For as fast as I learn things, I forget them again. So my mamma says that my intellect is not adapted for methodic science, and says that I must go in for general information. Tom told him that he didn't know general information, nor any officers in the army, only he had a friend once that went for a drummer. But he could tell him a great many strange things which he'd seen in his travels. So he told him, prettily enough, while the poor turnip listened very carefully, and the more he listened, the more he forgot, and the more water ran out of him. Tom thought he was crying, but it was only his poor brains running away from being worked so hard. And as Tom talked, the unhappy turnip streamed down all over with juice, split and shrank, till nothing was left of him but rind and water, whereat Tom ran away in a fright, for he thought he might be taken up for killing the turnip. But on the contrary, the turnip's parents were highly delighted, and considered him a saint and a martyr, and put up a long inscription over his tomb about his wonderful talents, early development, and unparalleled precocity. Were they not a foolish couple? But there was a still more foolish couple next to them, who were beating a wretched little radish, no bigger than my thumb, for sullenness and obstinacy and wilful stupidity, and never knew that the reason why it couldn't learn or hardly even speak was that there was a great worm inside it eating out all its brains. But even they're no foolisher than some 100 score of papas and mammas who fetch the rod when they ought to fetch a new toy, and send to the dark cupboard instead of to the doctor. Tom was so puzzled and frightened with all he saw that he was longing to ask the meaning of it, and at last he stumbled over a respectable old stick lying half covered with earth. But a very stout and worthy stick it was, for it belonged to good Roger Ascham in old time, and had carved on its head King Edward VI with the Bible in his hand. "You see," said the stick, "there were as pretty little children once as you could wish to see, and might have been so still if they had been only left to grow up like human beings, and then handed over to me. But their foolish fathers and mothers, instead of letting them pick flowers and make dirt pies and get birds' nests and dance round the gooseberry bush, as little children should, kept them always at lessons, working, learning weekday lessons all weekdays, and Sunday lessons all Sunday, and weekly examinations every Saturday, and monthly examinations every month, and yearly examinations every year, everything 7 times over, as if it once was not enough, and enough as good as a feast, till their brains grew big, and their bodies grew small, and they were all changed into turnips, with little but water inside. And still their foolish parents actually pick the leaves off them as fast as they grow, lest they should have anything green about them." "Oh," said Tom, "if dear Mrs. Do-as-you-would-be-done-by knew of it, she'd send them a lot of tops and balls and marbles and 9-pins and make them all as jolly as sandboys." "It would be no use," said the stick. "They can't play now, if they tried. Don't you see how their legs have turned to roots and grown into the ground by never taking any exercise, but sapping and moping always in the same place? But here comes the examiner of all examiners, so you'd better get away, I warn you, or he'll examine you, and your dog into the bargain, and set him to examine all the other dogs, and you to examine all the other water babies. There's no escaping out of his hands, for his nose is 9,000 miles long and can go down chimneys, through keyholes, upstairs, downstairs, and in my lady's chamber, examining all little boys, and the little boys' tutors likewise. But when he is thrashed, so Mrs. Be-done-by-as-you-did has promised me, I shall have the thrashing of him, and if I don't lay it on with a will, it's a pity." Tom went off, but rather slowly and surlily, for he was somewhat minded to face this same examiner of all examiners, who came striding among the poor turnips, binding heavy burdens and grievous to be borne, and laying them on little children's shoulders, like the scribes and Pharisees of old, and not touching the same with one of his fingers, for he had plenty of money, and a fine house to live in, and so forth, which was more than the poor little turnips had. But when he got near, he looked so big and burly and dictatorial, and shouted so loud to Tom to come and be examined, that Tom ran for his life, and the dog too, and really it was time, for the poor turnips, in their hurry and fright, crammed themselves so fast to be ready for the examiner that they burst and popped by dozens all round him, till the place sounded like Aldershot on a field day, and Tom thought he should be blown into the air, dog and all. As he went down to the shore, he passed the poor turnip's new tomb, but Mrs. Be-done-by-as-you-did had taken away the epitaph about talents and precocity and development, and put up one of her own instead, which Tom thought much more sensible. "Instruction long time I bore, and cramming was in vain, till heaven did please my woes to ease with water on the brain." So Tom jumped into the sea and swam on his way, singing, "Farewell, Tom Toddy's all, I thank my stars, that naught I know save those 3 royal R's. Reading, writing, sure, with 'rithmetic, will help a lad of sense through thin and thick." Whereby you may see that Tom was no poet, but no more was John Bunyan, though he was as wise a man as you'll meet in a month of Sundays. Next he came to Old Wives' Fabledom, where the folks were all heathens, and worshipped a howling ape. There he found a little boy sitting in the middle of the road and crying bitterly. "What are you crying for?" said Tom. "Because I'm not as frightened as I should wish to be." "Not frightened? You're a queer little chap. But if you want to be frightened, here goes boo!" "Ah," said the little boy, "that's very kind of you, but I don't feel it's made any impression." Tom offered to upset him, punch him, stamp on him, fettle him over the head with a brick, or anything else whatsoever which would give him the slightest comfort. But he only thanked Tom very civilly in fine long words which he had heard other folk use, and which therefore he thought were fit and proper to use himself, and cried on till his papa and mamma came, and sent off for the powwow man immediately. And a very good-natured gentleman and lady they were, though they were heathens, and talked quite pleasantly to Tom about his travels till the powwow man arrived with his thunderbox under his arm. And a well-fed, ill-favoured gentleman he was, as ever served Her Majesty at Portland. Tom was a little frightened at first, for he thought it was Grimes. But he soon saw his mistake, for Grimes always looked a man in the face, and this fellow never did. And when he spoke, it was fire and smoke, and when he sneezed, it was squibs and crackers, and when he cried, which he did whenever it paid him, it was boiling pitch, and some of it was sure to stick. "Here we are again," cried he, like the clown in a pantomime. "So you can't feel frightened, my dear? Hey, I'll do that for you. I'll make an impression on you. Yah! Boo! Whirroo! Hullabaloo!" And he rattled, thumped, brandished his thunderbox, yelled, shouted, raved, roared, stamped, and danced corroboree like any blackfellow, and then he touched a spring in the thunderbox, and out popped turnip ghosts, and magic lanterns, and pasteboard bogies, and spring-heeled jacks, and salaballas, with such a horrid din, clatter, clank, roll, rattle, and roar, that the little boy turned up the whites of his eyes and fainted right away. And at that his poor heathen papa and mamma were as much delighted as if they had found a gold mine, and fell down upon their knees before the powwow man, gave him a palanquin with a pole of solid silver and curtains of cloth of gold, and carried him about in it on their own backs. But as soon as they had taken him up, the pole stuck to their shoulders, and they could not set him down any more, but carried him on willy-nilly, as Sinbad carried the Old Man of the Sea, which was a pitiable sight to see, for the father was a very brave officer, wore 2 swords and a blue button, and the mother was very pretty a lady as ever had pinched feet like a Chinese. But you see, they had chosen to do a foolish thing just once too often. So by the laws of Mrs. Bedunby-as-you-did, they had to go on doing it whether they chose or not, till the coming of the Coqcigrues. Ah, don't you wish that someone would go and convert those poor heathens, and teach them not to frighten little children into fits? "Now then," said the powwow man to Tom, "wouldn't you like to be frightened, my little dear? For I can see plainly that you are a very wicked, naughty, graceless, reprobate boy." "You're another," quoth Tom very sturdily, and when the man ran at him and cried boo, Tom ran at him in return and cried boo likewise, right in his face, and set the little dog upon him, and at his legs the dog went. At which, if you'll believe it, the fellow turned tail, thunderbox and all, with a woof like an old sow on the common, ran for his life, screaming, "Help! Thieves! Murder! Fire! He's going to kill me! I'm a ruined man! He'll murder me! Break, burn, and destroy my precious and invaluable thunderbox, and then you will have no more thunder showers in the land! Help! Help! Help!" At which the papa and mamma and all the people of old wives' fabledom flew at Tom, shouting, "Oh, the wicked, impudent, hard-hearted, graceless boy! Beat him, kick him, shoot him, drown him, hang him, burn him," and so forth. But luckily they had nothing to shoot, hang, or burn him with, for the fairies had hid all the killing tackle out of the way a little while before, so they could only pelt him with stones. Some of the stones went clean through him, came out the other side, but didn't mind that a bit, for the holes closed up again as fast as they were made, because he was a water baby. However, he was very glad when he was safe out of the country, for the noise there made him all but deaf.